Now we need to gather our panel. We have 3 professors and a student. Could Deborah, Nicholas, Lars, and Maren please come to the stage? Hei. Ta plass på. Hei. Hyggelig. Hi, nice to meet you. Hello. Nice to meet you. So, it's interesting times with all the new technology, AI, machine learning, ethics, privacy, all the stuff you went through the last half hour, Deborah. I was a student 27 years ago with Lars, actually. And at that time, Lars, we worried about the CNN, the global village. We worried about TV. We worried about the MTV, short attention spans. It all looks a little small to worry about that compared to what we see now. So starting with you, Lars, is there more reason to worry for technology now than it was in 1991?
Well, it's easy to answer in one way, because since 1991 we have had so much more technology, literally speaking. You could weigh it, or you can count the connections, or you could do it in any kind of way, and it would anyway prove that we have so much more. It's so much deeper into our lives, it's so much larger out into space. So, obviously, yes, it has become more powerful or more influential or whatever criteria you work against. And just to throw in an academic reference, Ray Kurzweil is talking about exponential historical growth. It's a historical theory that presumes an exponential growth of technology, which, well, basically is empirically valid nowadays. Maybe not forever, but now it is. So,
being young students, I think we told each other that to worry was the role of parents. We were talking about moral panics, like there's always a moral panic. It always turns out fine. The train wasn't dangerous, TV wasn't dangerous, and so on. Maren, you're a young student now. Do you and your students worry, or do you think it's all fine?
I think we worry about social media. We worry about what information we are giving out and on social media, but I also think that a lot of people don't worry. I think we have adapted this carefree attitude towards media and being online and being so public. And I think I worry because I've thought about this a lot and I have reflected on it, but I think a lot of people, and a lot of young people and young students don't really think about potential consequences.
Nicholas, of course, it's as you were saying, Deborah, you can worry, you can be a critic, but are there more reason now to be worried than there was 20 years before?
Well, from my point of view, what's changed is the scale factor. So, with the growth, the exponential growth of computing power and storage and so on, and the ability for AI to now impact the media systems via that exponential growth, I think we're just seeing all kinds of issues emerge as a result of that scale. Things like pollution at scale, information pollution at scale, things like mass targeted advertising and what that means to have personal data collected at scale. So maybe it's a continuation of things, but sometimes I think a change in scale can actually open up whole new sets of problems for society.
Deborah, could we worry too much? A lot of the things we thought were going to happen 30 years ago, flying cars and stuff, it didn't happen. Are you sure there'll be robots we can have sex with?
I'm actually more sure about that than I am about other things, but just because I've read enough to know what they're up to. But it's a really hard question. I mean, I used to be the one, when I first started out working on computer stuff 20, 30 years ago, I used to be the one that countered the hype. It is to say, oh no, there's no revolution. And now I do think that something has happened. I don't know if it's scale the things that come to mind for me is the interactivity of digital technologies, or the autonomy, the autonomous nature of them. That does seem, it seems like this computer revolution really has, there's something different. Like it would be like electricity. I mean, you could go back and say there's certain technologies in history that really
Just blew it up.
transformed.
Yeah. Please just show your hands. Just take the word, and if you want to join in the conversation.
Yeah.
Have you all seen those yellow robot dogs from Boston Dynamics? The ones where they help each other to open a heavy steel door.
Oh, yes, I have.
It was the BBC personality who posted it that brought my attention at Twitter. And his short comment was, "We're all going to die." Are we approaching a point where the public simply says, "Hey, wait a minute, this is too much"? Or is there still a long way to go? Anyone? Lars?
Well, the public will be pushing the buttons on the devices more or less forever. Maybe there will be a voice assistant instead. So there's no doubt that everybody will keep pushing the buttons. It's not an entire answer to your question, but they won't go up into the cabins where you sort of wouldn't be without the internet, because they have, of course, internet in their cabins too. So there is no way that the public can move away from this technological infrastructure. So in that sense, the answer is no.
It's unavoidable.
Counter to that. So, I included in my talk this thing about unemployment or employment. And I don't have, as an ethicist, it's a hard issue to say, but I include it because that's where I think the revolution, the resistance is likely to arise. And so, but I just want to say this. There was a lot of resistance to computers when they first came out. And then the counter to that was always that, in fact, computer technology created more jobs than it eliminated, because there are so many IT jobs. I just don't see that happening here.
I just finished reading a popular book from Martin Ford. He also uses the entire book to argue this time is different. What are your thoughts?
So I actually thought that the robot dogs helping each other open the door was cute. So I don't have any negative reactivity against dogs, helping out around the apartment. But what really frightened me was a different video of a robot. This one was of a humanoid robot that could walk and then jump up onto a crate and then jump and flip itself around 180 and then do a backflip off the crate. Yeah, that's a little scary when you start seeing things that look a little bit more humanoid, doing very kind of human actions that are somewhat challenging to pull off. But is it unavoidable? I don't know. I mean, I think people have different reactivities to these technologies. I think you can design things to be cute and approachable, or a little bit more terrifying looking. So I think designers kind of have a role to play in sort of the public reactivity to these things.
But a few thousand of those dogs attacking, that's scary. Maybe, if they're strong enough.
Maybe, yeah.
Maren, what do you worry most about? Are there anything that you mentioned social media? Are other things, the AI and machine learning that you?
What I worry most about is that social media and new technology that's coming can be misused, and that gullible young people might be tricked or might not even learn about the potential consequences. So that's what I'm most worried about. I'm not as worried about robots stealing our jobs and so on, and that humans will get more or less use of human workforce. I'm not worried about that so much, because I think there will always be something for humans to do. There will always be work and always something to do. Who is going to build these robots? Who are going to fix them, and so on? So I'm not that worried about that. But I'm worried about privacy being, disappearing, and that especially young people and kids not being aware of this and how they can protect themselves.
As a journalist, I would like to put things in the news on this, of course. So let's talk about Facebook. I think 8 years ago I went to a congress in Denmark where there was this American journalist, David Kirkpatrick, who wrote a book about Facebook, and he went on stage and sincerely claimed that Facebook was making the world a better place. He was saying things like, well, people will not be allowed to cheat in the future because everybody can see what everybody do, so it'll be better for everyone. Now, 8 or 9 years later, we now know about the 50 million profiles stolen of Cambridge Analytics, the last news from America and England this weekend. And Facebook didn't know. It seems they couldn't even control their own technology, their own platform.
Yeah.
How does that play, Lars?
Well, that fits very nicely into certain types of theory where you would actually presume that there is no real control by, let's say, a business leader or a very influential person or actually anybody. So it's a wonderful pitch for technological determinism if you say that the bosses of Silicon Valley don't even know what's happening to their own machinery. That's kind of obvious. That's exactly what you would expect. So my worry, just to throw in some worrying from this side of the table too, it's like I'm worrying that we are misunderstanding how things really are. Like continuing to have let's say, an idealistic, even naive understanding of the technological developments that are ongoing. They fit better with the 1970s or with some kind of revolutionary vigor from the 1960s or so on, but they are utterly outdated when it comes to trying to describe what is actually going on. So I'm not saying I'm sure about the new theories, but some of the old ones are flat out wrong now. And what you're saying, that Facebook doesn't even know what's going on Facebook, is, well, just that's how it is.
No.
I think it's not surprising that they have lost control because it's a platform that they have done so accessible to anyone in the world. And I think even though they have rules and regulations, people will do what they feel like and use that platform for themselves and use it to what they want to use it for. So I'm not very surprised that they don't really have control of everything, because I don't think it's, when they make it accessible for the whole world, it's not realistic to have control of everything. So I'm not surprised that they didn't know that.
Niklas?
Well, I think the real story there in the Facebook news that broke, I mean, I think there's different frames you can put on it. One of the frames is that really this is a story of a researcher who gained access to Facebook data through legitimate means. You know, Facebook does share some of their data with researchers in order to do science and study various aspects of social science. You know, that person signed a contract that said they wouldn't reshare their data, and that person didn't honor the contract that they signed. So they broke the contract and shared the data with these other firms, who then essentially laundered the data through to campaigns who used it in different ways. But this is all sort of by design for Facebook. I mean, this is how it's set up. This is how it operates. It collects data. It permits various apps to collect that data. It permits people to access that data via APIs. It permits, special researchers special access to certain data. So this is sort of how the system has been set up. But it's sort of entirely unsurprising that someone decided they wanted to break the rules and use the data some other way.
Deborah?
Well, this kind of makes me, we're going to have a, I mean, I think
Okay.
that entirely...
We should have some tension here.
Yeah, come on.
entirely lets Facebook off the hook for not monitoring the people it gives the data to, or not having any response. The way I read the story, they asked them whether they had destroyed the data, and they said, and then didn't follow up on the answer. But in any case, my point is, and maybe this is just kind of for future reference, if you've got data like that and you give it out for research, you've got some responsibility to monitor what the people you've given it to have done with it. I mean, you can't, they're not off the hook, to my, and it would be just terrible to let them off the hook, because then it will happen more and more.
Lars?
Well, if privacy is so difficult to protect, and we have all these variations of how this information is being misused or used, so what about not considering it important anymore? Just to have this idea out there. If technological infrastructures can control certain types of information in ways that we cannot really handle, especially not as individuals, maybe one of our approaches would be to devalue this kind of thing. I'm not saying that's very easy, and especially not with revenge porn and extreme examples where nobody can ignore it. But nevertheless, as a coping strategy, if you de-importantify information.
Does it matter, Maren?
I think making the private information less important, or the perception of that information less important, I don't think that's a very smart solution. I think it's more of a short-term solution to worry yourself less. I don't think, because private information will always be very valuable, it will always mean something to a lot of people. So I think it's a very fragile information that you have to be careful about, and when you have stored all this private information for so many millions of humans and people, that can actually have very terrible consequences if they get into the wrong hands. I think you have a very big responsibility to not share that information with anyone, actually. I think it's...
But can I interject there? What if that information, and this is a real case, private information on Facebook allows Facebook to determine if someone is suicidal, and Facebook has an opportunity to intervene and potentially prevent that.
Yeah.
I mean, should we go that route? Should we disallow that use of the data?
Yes. It's not their job to do suicide prevention.
But couldn't it be, though?
Well, that would be, then there would have to be an agreement with users that your data was going to be used in that way.
I think I see what you're meaning here and where you're coming from, and I think it is an ethical question, and it is more of how we define Facebook's role in society and what kind of part they would take in that. And I think that if we were to, as Deborah said, if we were to if they were to act on this in that type of situations, it would be something that was agreed upon beforehand and with all Facebook users. So I think that should be agreed upon first, and then they can take action. And they would also have to make kind of like a group that is specialized in this, and a group of psychologists, a group of people that can evaluate these situations further. I don't think that the technicians behind Facebook would have the knowledge behind it to kind of handle those type of situations.
So I'm a little curious. Obviously, running through Facebook data, you can learn a lot about me and you as a person, what values you approve, what politics you support. But can you actually change a person's behavior? I guess it's hard to find an individual saying, I was tricked into voting for Donald Trump.
But that's the issue that's currently being debated.
Yeah. So what do you think?
People were manipulated in the sense of...
Were they? Really?
Being
Is
told
that possible?
Things that weren't true is the utmost in being manipulated.
I'm less concerned about people being directly manipulated in the sense of having, I'm thinking I'm going to vote for Hillary, and then all of a sudden I see an ad, and all of a sudden I'm a Trump supporter. I'm not saying that couldn't happen, but I don't know for what percentage of people they're flipping their vote based on a few ads that they see on Facebook. However, I think the really important thing that we need to pay attention to is that, at least in the U.S., elections are won based on turnout because we don't typically have a large turnout. So if you can get certain demographics to turn out in higher proportions and other demographics to turn out in lower proportions, then then it's a game, and we can play that game. Facebook didn't publish, but presented a study done by some research scientists by their data science team about 5 years ago, which showed that they had done an internal study which showed that by turning up the amount of hard news content that they were showing people in their news feeds, that this actually increased the turnout of voters in the next election. So just with that one parameter, they're able to change the amount of turnout. Now, and I'm not saying that anyone has ever done this, but you can imagine the potential there to differentially turn out different demographics. And that is, I think, the very powerful thing that we need to be wary of with Facebook.
Maren?
I think that social media in general has a very big impressional power on people, but I don't think that they alone is the reason why people are the way they are. I think we are people that humans are creatures that get impressions from everywhere, from school, from social relations to social media, but I don't think social media itself can change a whole person. So I don't think that's something that they have the power to do, but they do have a lot of power to kind of maybe change people's opinions, maybe change people's views on politics and so on.
I'm going to ask a terrible question. Do we now start to understand why the elites ages ago didn't want everybody to vote? Lars?
Well, you're dealing with very high-end activities here, like voting, which are very, at least traditionally, you enter a room and there is a ceremony, and it's a very conscious activity. So if that's what you're talking about, it has some of the allure that it has always had, whatever technology introduces. So it is an interesting topic, but I think some of the more important things are going on deeper down in the system. So not to avoid your question,
Sure.
Maybe, but if you imagine that, let's say, in my case, I was a humanist for at least 20 years. I studied and read all these nice theories about how important the humans are, and we are writing the books about how important we are also, just to mention it. So if we look at this from a slightly different angle, we could look at the technology's interest in this, or the infrastructure that is existing out there now. What's the interest of this thing or entity? That's something that we don't have to discuss a lot. It's like silly. So I'm just going out on the limb and I'm looking for answers to that kind of question. And it's slightly worrying, because then it seems that, in strictly speaking, whatever we push into the social medium, I mean literally, whatever it is, Chinese or Norwegian or anti-Sylvi Listhaug or I love everybody, doesn't matter. What it really does is to give energy to the network. I mean it quite literally, so it's you can disagree with me if you want to, but we are giving energy to the network through our pushing and writing activities. If we look at it like that, then it doesn't really matter what we are doing. So the humanity of ourselves is being reduced in this setting. That's kind of scary, and maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. I just want to make sure that we don't forget the technology, or rather this huge infrastructure of exponential growth, that it has interests, literally. It has purposes. It has all of these things that resemble human interests.
I could push back on that a little bit, in the sense that, you know, if you look at human motivation theory, one of the strongest motivators for any human behavior is social interaction. So, you know, you could look at it in terms of we're feeding the network, but we're also feeding ourselves. We're self-motivated to interact and communicate socially. So in a sense, I kind of feel like the platforms figured us out. They figured out how to align their goals with our own human motivations, and they figured out a business model for that too.
That's true.
Deborah, you want to add?
Well, I mean, I think this is really complicated, and I hesitate, but I think the counter to it is that you're naturalizing the network. You're making it seem like it is the way it has to be, or the way, you know, nature, like nature, it just is. And I think that sort of blinds us to the fact that the the network or the infrastructure is a kind of human creation that, and I believe that there are human interests that have created it, and so it works the way it works, not by some natural force, but because of decisions that people have made to let it work that way. So I'm worried about naturalizing technology and infrastructure, because I think it is people. I mean, I think it's, so I think it's political. I think
Depends
it's
on your perspective. So if I'm like gunning away here, you could say that for something like for almost 500 million years, evolution was the most intelligent force on Earth. And then you had like a tiny period maybe of 200,000 years when the modern human was the most intelligent force on Earth.
I don't know why you call these
Well,
intelligent
let's see.
forces.
Yeah, okay, and then you have, let's say, the machines, if you go for the science fiction version, but just like technology that has been infused with this intelligence, first through the humans, and then from the humans to these structures. And if that's the case, then the humans are just like one of many features that make this phenomenon grow. I'm not saying, again, it's the case. I'm saying it's very interesting to try to get a little off this humanism hill that we are on.
Humanism pill. You want to follow up?
Well, I'm smiling because I don't know if you want us to continue on this. I think the forces that are now at work are market forces, not. They dominate, and I think that's very different than evolution, which, by the way, for the sake of argument, I would say is not. We call it intelligence, but to me, that's a kind of imposition. Nature is nature, so to speak, and that it's intelligent is just what we sort of because we're the result, so we call it intelligent because we're the outcome, but.
Competing theories.
Right.
But let me ask a simple question. As you know, we almost lost our prime minister today because of the way we speak in social media and the way one of our ministers speak in social media. In the US, you have been used to a very harsh climate for years. Does that have anything at all with social media to do?
Yes.
It has.
Well,
even though the
we have
partisanship has
government
been
by tweet.
Sure, now you have, but you also been fighting heavily for years, even before Facebook was.
It's true.
Yeah. But has it been amplified now?
Oh, yeah. You ask me, there's no doubt in my mind it's been amplified. But it's a combination of forces. I think, like Maren was saying, it's not just social media. I mean, newspapers were already going in a certain, no longer being public, kind of, or private, small. But so there are a whole bunch of forces that were leading to this polarization.
I mean, from my point of view, I think the polarization has most likely gotten worse because of manipulation of the social media. So, any kind of wedge topic or controversy will have trolls and bots who are trying to get people riled up and angry at the other side, or get them to express their an even more polarized opinion. So, it's hard to separate that out from the social media versus other actors within the social media who are trying to gin up dissent. I'm not sure what the outcome will be there, but we are getting more polarized as a society.
Are you worried from the Norwegian perspective?
I also think that social media in general can help polarize a society because people don't really click in on long articles. They don't really read all the information that is behind an argument or a conflict. Many people just read the headlines, and the headlines can be so misleading. So I think that the attention span has become so much smaller now, has also contributed to misunderstood meanings and opinions, and and that again kind of led to more polarization and more, like harsh words against each other. So I think that people are less educated on certain topics, and that can also have contributed to a more polarized society.
It's just what I was thinking, that, one of the explanations for what the polarization does have to do with, in the US, I would say, the failure of our educational system. At least it used to be much more uniform. Now it's very uneven, and that has resulted in, plus this urban-rural thing has continued, that's been going on for a century or more, so that's exacerbated it too. So people really do have different lives. So they are different. So, but education has been a real, for us, a failure. I don't know how it is in Norway. I don't know if you have uniformly good education. We don't. We have very skewed.
Yeah. We still don't pay for it, I guess, at least. And universities, Lars. What about employment? We just touched it. I need to go back to that. How pessimistic are you guys on machines and employment? Will there be enough jobs for everyone in 20 years? Lars?
Well, let's say that some of the earlier delegations that technology could take care of was like, oh, it's so heavy to dig in the dirt, so we invented the digging machine, and so we don't have to dig the dirt. Then you will lose jobs in that way. But we are way beyond that now. That's not the kind of jobs that are being automated. It's the jobs where you have to think, which also feeds into better algorithms, and bigger databases can be built in the mountains to deal with all this thinking that goes into the machinery. And so, honestly, some types of jobs will be lost to machines that could not be lost before. And this has to do with the exponential growth of technology. If you take that seriously, and it's not just like this Silicon Valley myth, then that's how it goes. And I agree with you, and there's no doubt somebody has to fix the machines. You have to, for a while at least, you have to make the energy resources available for the machinery. You will have to do lots of things, and of course there's a very good case for inventing new jobs. That has happened many times, so it would be kind of risky to say that that cannot happen this time. But the thing is, it cannot happen with the types of jobs that we are automating, and if we are automating more and more jobs that we couldn't previously, well, maybe the room for the new jobs becomes smaller or narrower.
Yeah.
So what are safe jobs for the next 20 years that will be not automated?
State jobs in Norway.
State jobs.
Annotating data is pretty safe, and it's a growth industry. Anyone want to be a data annotator? Google, Facebook, they all have lots of jobs for you, although you'd have to work as a contractor, so you wouldn't actually be working for the company. You'd be working for some other subsidiary or some other company that's contracted to do the work. There'll be lots of jobs in moderating content on these platforms. The platforms are struggling with keeping hate speech, harassment, and so on out of view, and they need to hire people to make sense of that, and watch videos, look at images, and make sure to get the junk off. So those jobs are safe. Those are not good jobs, though. Those are tedious jobs which sort of just barely need human intelligence. I actually think that a lot of jobs in journalism are pretty safe. I've looked pretty closely at that industry, and given the amount of complex communication that reporters and editors engage with in their daily routines, that seems unlikely that being able to do a really sophisticated interview with someone who might be trying to deceive you or lie to you or not tell you something, I just don't see a robot in the foreseeable future, certainly not in 20 years, being able to take on that kind of work.
Maybe we could keep serious journalism and let the robots do sports and finance.
For a little while, and then it learns. Because that's the problem here, is that all the jobs you mentioned, they are basically jobs that will feed more intelligence, metaphorically speaking anyway, to the system. And so maybe in the end you could automatize those jobs also, because there's some sheets of paper you have to read or whatever, Chris. That's not too difficult. So it depends.
This is very complicated because if there aren't many, I'm inclined to think not that there are certain, that we'll still need people in jobs, but there will be fewer and fewer people. So, but if you go the direction where you've got huge populations that don't have work, then you don't have the economy fails because you don't have enough customers to keep. I mean, I think this is and what worries me more than the jobs is implied. I think what's happening now is if I can just be really philosophical, the more we invest in machines, the less we invest in people. So all the forces that have resources, don't need people, they need more and more machines and intelligent machines. So if you don't invest in people, so I think people are becoming less educated, not more, the divide.
Yep.
The divide.
Maren?
I might be a naive young person, but I believe that when we see throughout technological developments, you can see that things have been invented and things have been replaced and improved and been replaced by robots, but there's always been created new problems to solve and new technologies that need people to work on, or human workforce to solve that problem. So I really believe that I think we shouldn't worry that much about having less jobs for humans. I think there will always be some problem that robots can't solve. Human workforce is very unique, and it's very something that robots can't replace entirely. And I also think there will be professions that aren't even invented yet. So I don't think we should worry too much about that. And when it comes to jobs that will be secure, I think anything that has to do with human relations, like psychologists, therapists, maybe like teachers, for example, people that work with people, I think there is something very unique with a human interacting with a human, and I don't think that a robot can replace, for example, a therapist in the same way, and that person will get the same use out of it, or same.
But
yeah.
don't you think a therapist are thinking, oh, it's so the same thing, same guys coming in all the time. They worry about the same stuff. I tell them the same
Yes.
stuff. Can a computer do that? Or is it like Maren says, you need this human interaction? Lars?
Well, what we also can notice nowadays is that the interfaces towards us become more intelligent or more clever. So one thing is to have a huge computer in the background crunching info, but if you have this therapist like behaving just like a human, it passes the Turing test, and nobody can really know exactly. Well, then of course it will work. At least that's my
Will they ever?
assumption.
Did you get the TV show Humans here?
I haven't seen it. Anyone?
Okay.
Humans?
Because they do have a part of it where the couple needs marriage counseling, and they have a choice between a humanoid therapist and a real therapist.
But I think we're kind of, sorry.
Yeah.
I feel that's living in a world of fantasy. Like, what's the state of the art in terms of AI being able to do therapy? I mean, there's a great book that just came out called Automating Inequality, and it's not about therapy. It's more, but it is about human relationship, and it's about attempts to automate welfare benefit administration in several different cases in the U.S., looking at benefits in Indiana and the homeless program in Los Angeles and so on. And really, I mean, the results are just dismal. I mean, all kinds of stories of people not being able to develop a relationship with their caseworker, because the caseworker, there are still caseworkers, but They've sort of been algorithmatized, so when you call in, you get a different caseworker. They don't know who you are. They don't know what your issues are. They don't know that, you know, your family member has a learning disability. You know, it's just becomes very difficult to really help people when it's just brought down to a quantification, to a number, and to a database.
But you're assuming that governments and other organizations won't use it if it's not good. You know,
Oh, they have used it.
that's my point.
And that's the and
That's
so
my point.
people will try to employ the technology,
Yes.
even though it's not really maintaining the same
It's-
quality of interaction.
That's the
Yeah, but I think I see what you're saying, and I think a lot of systems don't work, and I think there should be more structure to it, so that one caseworker only work with one person or something like that. But I don't believe that sorry, that robots can feel same human empathy as, or same emotions, or relate to that person who is going through a difficult time on the same level. And I would like to think that humans is useful to have around when these situations are occurring.
Lars?
Well, you would not have, the machine would not have the emotions, it would simulate them, which, by the way, is the definition of any technology, strictly speaking, that it simulates something
Exactly.
for us. So it's not a requirement that the robot has to be human in order to help us, or whatever it does to us. It's enough that it can simulate something that we react to. And I think we have plenty of evidence that while it may not be able to simulate the most complicated aspects of the human mind, it can simulate so many things that it's more than enough to have something to talk about when it comes to worrying and so on.
I discovered one hand in the audience. Please, if anyone else has anything to say, just show your hands. One more there, but first, I think it was Ar. If you can get the microphone to the fourth row.
Yes, thank you for a very, very interesting discussion. And I think before discussing the possible role for machines and humans in a newsroom, I think it will be necessary first to discuss what will the type of journalism, what type of journalism do we need in the future? Mm. If we start with that question, in this new time, like Professor Paul Adams telling us that in this new environment we see there are no where is the limit between what is fake and what is fiction, and where is the role of journalism in that way? The answer is it's the process. We have to be more open, more transparent. And that as a part a machine can do, but as a human, maybe with assistant robotics or data assistant machines, maybe could do more. But if you are dependent on to be open and to showing all the sources in all the way, well, then the position and the profession as a journalist be dead?
No, I don't think the profession of journalism will go away. I don't think it will die. I think to pick up on something, sort of a direction Deborah was going. I mean, you know, the main powers at play are sort of capitalist powers who are using AI and technology to sort of reinforce and maintain their power and their influence and control. I think journalism needs to adapt to hold accountable those actors who are accruing more power in society through the consolidation of AI capabilities. So looking at how AI and algorithmic technologies are accruing wealth, and being able to critique the values that are embedded in those systems and value misalignments between the owners and designers of those technologies and with the broader society's values and goals. And also being able to critique and audit and evaluate the abuse of power that's being exercised via these cognitive technologies and AI technologies. So, you know, I don't think journalists should, you know, increase sort of technology journalism that we're sort of familiar with, you know, this sort of widget-based, here's the latest VR helmet that came out from whatever company. But I think we need a much more deliberate kind of expansion of journalism to cover these technologies and how they're being used.
Lars?
Yes, that's a very interesting, big question in many ways. You could say that if journalism is, if it's possible for journalism to have the same purpose as before, let's say critical, disclosure of so and so, then you could imagine that we try to find the tools that will make this purpose, this norm, stay there, so that it can work like it has always done. That would be something like sustainable innovation for journalism. Well, I think that's kind of naive to imagine that that would be very easy. So let's say we have dealt with the facial manipulation technologies. Clearly you could simulate those types of journalism and fool people, or just reduce the credibility of the whole thing. So there's another approach also, which I recommend. You could call it transgressive design instead of sustainable. It means that you then jump out into the water where these new technologies or these artificial intelligence things are or whatever, and you just have to deal with the qualities that they have. And it also means the transgressive thing is that you will have to damage the old ideals, the norms that don't work anymore. Just have to be carefully replaced, more or less, with new norms. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, if journalism is supposed to be absolutely realistic, that nobody has ever hampered with anything in a serious newspaper, well, that will marginalize this business and it will end up in a corner somewhere, honestly. Mm-hmm. But if you reinvent the criteria for seriousness or for truth along with what's on the ground, what you're actually dealing with in the technological sense, I'm not saying it's very easy, but that's a better approach in the long term.
So one follow-up question could be, which forms of journalism will be important in the years to come?
I'm glad you said forms of journalism, because I was thinking in response to his question about thinking about journalism in the future, or new, reporters or news. You can't think that without thinking about who the audiences will be in the future. And so forms, I think,
yeah, but it shouldn't be a problem if a computer tells me the score in a game.
Right.
But what forms of journalism do we have to keep close to our hearts, we as journalists?
Local journalism.
Mm-hmm.
What is
very
it?
important. Local journalism.
Local journalism.
Yeah.
Well, and also accountability journalism. I mean, journalism that holds institutions and individuals accountable, I think, are critical to democracy.
What's the play for local journalism? Sorry.
Yeah, no.
I didn't know. I wanted to ask Lars, what's the play for local journalism? Why do you think is that something to?
Well, now I'm a big fan of local journalism. So that may be part of the explanation. But let's say it's very near. Some of this you can verify yourself, more or less literally. There is, anyway, a very important feature of your role as a citizen is your own engagement in the local environment, in the local community. So in that sense, local journalism will always be very important.
But that's one of the things I had in mind when I was thinking about the audience. So the question is, in the future, will we be global citizens and local citizens, or will the balance shift? I don't know. I mean, I am inclined to go with you and think we're always local because we're always bodies and places, or spaces, but I don't know.
But we have a lot of digital experience too, right?
Yeah,
we
exactly.
spend a lot of time immersed in this digital reality. So, do we need more of a the coverage of the digital community that you're participating in? I don't know.
It's actually an interesting conversation for Norwegians versus Americans, because I always think that Europeans in general are much more aware of the whole world, and Americans tend to be American-oriented. So I don't know, so which one's better?
And that is still a point, isn't it, Lars? We still care about the world, even though we love our local newspapers.
Yeah, well, that's
we
like
don't.
shifting the...
No, you don't, no.
I mean, national, like last week we have seen that national journalism in this country can scream at you like crazy. So I wouldn't say that local journalism is the big thing and the rest is in a corner. It's actually opposite. And like Trump journalism. And we read so much more about Donald Trump than we need. I mean, we need a maximum of 5 minutes a week to read about Donald Trump compared to what all the other things we should concern ourselves with. So I would say local journalism is important, but it's weak. It's not strength.
We had a new question on row 5.
Is it on? It's drawing away from the talk on journalism, though, so it was on the point before, but I can recommend a book by Richard and David Susskind. I don't know if you know the book. It's The Future of the Professions. And we had a conference just before Christmas in Oslo on AI and the different professions. And I think a lot of it has to do with, I think you'll find a lot of the people doing research with AI, and I've been in that field since the 70s, 80s. I mean, we are looking at empowering people, and we're looking at in improving way people do jobs and things like that. And I think it's like Deborah said, it's like the marketplace takes over and things become then sort of what can we do with this commercially, and it becomes, takes a life of its own in some ways. But I think one of the most interesting examples he has in his book is if you have the choice of having a human judge or an algorithm making your sentencing, pick the algorithm. Because they have found that judges are impacted by have they eaten, have they had a fight with their wife, is it after lunch? Is it before lunch? And you will have a much fairer judgment if you have the algorithm.
And you can make that argument on any subject, on medicine, of course, and a lot of stuff. People say that in the near future, AI will make a so much better job than humans. We started a little early, so I think we're going to finish in 5 or 6 minutes. So please, if you have any questions, please show your hands. I would just like to explore with you, what do you think are the limits for what's possible? I remember from the 70s when I was a kid, there was so much anticipation and optimism about the mechanical revolution, like nuclear plants, nuclear stuff. We had the Concorde plane, right? We were soon going to fly cars. A lot of expectations around a lot of stuff, and then it just stopped. The Concorde is no more. We don't fly to the moon anymore, and we're afraid of nuclear plants. So that all stopped. Will we have self-driving cars in 10 years? Will we live till we are 200? Where do you see the limits for all this? If you could start, Deborah.
You want me to start? Well, self-driving, I have a lot of opinions about autonomous cars or self-driving. So here's what, this is a hard question, I'm hesitating.
Are we too optimistic?
Here's what I know, or what I think I know, is that whatever we're thinking now will be in the future, it won't quite be that. It'll be something, things happen, and it's always much more complicated than we think at this point. So even in the case of autonomous cars, I think, personally, I think we're not going to have autonomous cars as some people imagine a world or a city filled with autonomous cars. What we'll get is some variation where certain places there will be, or certain routes or streets will have autonomous cars, and other places won't, or certain cities maybe. But I think that for a bunch of reasons. One has to do with safety. I think it's too complicated to make, and the other has to do with you can't have a system of autonomous cars unless they're all autonomous. You can't have a mixture, so the transition from here to there seems to me almost impossible. And then the other sort of thing I think about a lot is, so we think autonomous cars, we're going there in theory because we think they're going to be safer. And yet, the complexity that we're introducing into this system makes it the risks, and it's not just technological risks, it's human risks. By that I mean the people who have designed the things and tested the things. And so, but like I say, we'll get something. And in fact, as I was saying earlier to somebody, our cars, driver cars, are much safer now because of all the work on autonomous cars. We have these sensors and mirrors and all the. So So I just think it's gonna. We don't know. It really is unknown. There are twists and
So there's a lot of automatic stuff in my car, but it all stops working when it snows. So that maybe says that it looks promising, but the last mile is perhaps the most difficult mile, isn't it? What do you think? Where are the limits for you and your belief in technology?
Well, I mean, I think the autonomous vehicle example is an interesting one. I mean, the news was just this morning that someone was killed by an autonomous Uber
Pedestrian.
vehicle. Yeah, pedestrian.
Which shouldn't happen. That's classic AI, just the camera watching a person and recognizing.
You would hope so.
Yeah.
And I think there'll need to be a period of diagnosis and trying to understand exactly what happened, and
and we'll learn.
And we'll learn, and we'll have to try to build that into the next iteration of the car and the system. But I think there will always be the outliers. The situations where the system didn't have enough data to recognize what was happening and act in an appropriate way, or in the way that we would expect it. I think particularly in the domain of news, the one I'm most familiar with, this open world problem is something that journalists deal with on a daily basis. I mean, new things happen, new events happen, new new situations on Facebook happen, new posts on Facebook happen, and you have to understand the social context and what are the implications of that Facebook post for the government and so on. And that would maybe not be something that the algorithm had seen before, and so it wouldn't know how to react, or it wouldn't know the right questions to ask. And so I think that's a general limitation of any sort of machine learning system, is it will be limited by its ability to get enough training data and understand that the world is dynamic, it's changing, and that I think we'll always need people who, in my view, are much more flexible and able to cope with those situations.
Maren, what are your expectations?
My expectations to technology in the future is very high. I think that we can't really set a limit to development or to the future. I think everything that will be, and that we can't stop ourselves or can't limit ourselves, and we should continue on to discover new things and invent new things, and hopefully there will be flying cars in the future. I think that technology is a great thing, and it has improved our lives so much more. So I hope that we continue on and don't limit ourselves too much, because I think the future will never stop, so I don't think the development will either.
Lars?
Yeah, what's the limit of the possible, you ask? That's a very interesting, nice question.
Yeah.
So I would say that the limits of the possible is the limit of human imagination. And so we can always be very self-secure. So we can say, no, of course we can just imagine that we are beyond our imagination. Like, let's have a game. We imagine that we are beyond what we can imagine. That's cheating. It doesn't work. No, sorry. So there is, potentially anyway, according to a determinist theory of technology, there is this potential called the singularity, where you will reach the type of intelligence that presumes so many inputs that a human cannot in any way deal with it. And that, what happens after that, this is highly speculative, but it could happen in 1 second, for example. The artificial intelligence could decide something in 1 second that, for example, blow up the entire world. But what is much more likely is just that we will reach a level of intelligence surrounding us where we cannot really play on our own faculties as humans and have this certainty that we have sort of always had, that we are the smartest, or that we are in control. I'm a little tired of this word, but we are rather like technology's little helpers. We've always been very good at being the technology's little helpers, and we have helped it so much now. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting perspective.
Thank you. Yes, please, this side.
I'm quite skeptical about talking about technology as something only happening. People make technology happen, and what we want it to happen, then it can be realized in many ways. But also think about that technology has also, in the way, destroy of a planet. Look about the climate change. It's technology which is has a lot of the consequences is technology. And if we are naive and technology optimists, like just things will happen and it's a lot of good things, I think we destroy the world around us and ourselves in the same place. So responsibility is my last word.
Well, it depends. If my theory is correct, responsibility would not be to continue to say that humans can fix it ourselves. That would be highly irresponsible, because it would not be possible. So it depends.
You can always flip a switch, turn off the electricity.
I hear people say that. I don't often see people actually turning off the switch, but I hear them say that they can do it.
And I also don't think there are any limitations in human imagination, because there will always be born new people with a new imagination. There will always be new ideas, always a new person who comes up with something new. So I don't think that will be a problem either. It might not be, the development might not be as fast as with robots, but I don't think robots can create all new things like humans can. I think we humans design robots to do our dirty work, and then I think us humans come up with the ideas, we come up with the new solutions, and then invent robots to do the rest.
You mentioned, Deborah, failure. You used the word just. And that's the word I use a lot in Silicon Valley, isn't it? You have to fail to learn and to move on. Is that also the case when you talk about the human side of machines and the worry that we need as a society, philosophically, academically, to fail and discuss it and move on?
Well, that's always the hard way to learn, right? I mean, that's what the anticipatory move is preferable, but not perfect, because you can't anticipate. So we're kind of stuck between what's the phrase, something in a hard place, a rock in a hard place, in the sense that we can't go into the future without sort of having a plan, but you're never going to be able to anticipate all the things you're likely to encounter. So you have a plan, but you have to change the plan as you learn. So I don't know what the alternative is.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges in coping with how things evolve, how technology evolves in the future, is how to regulate these systems, particularly in a global environment where, one version of the Google or Facebook algorithm is affecting people in many, many different jurisdictions and with different regulatory environments. So coming up with models to govern these sort of global technologies, I think, is going to be a real challenge for how to adapt the technology as we move forward in the future.
Question right there in the back.
Hello, and thank you for a very interesting discussion. I come from the municipality of Bergen, so I see this with a kind of a different framework. Because a lot of the technology that you have been discussing is also familiar within I call it the smart city movement. So municipalities and public actors all over the world are trying to understand what the technology means, how it should be used, how should we think about this, and consider everything, ethics, what the people actually need, etc. I mean, it's you also have, if you see international smart city conferences, you see differences between different parts of the world. Like the Nordic model has different values within the technology than, for example, some Asian countries that are more on the surveillance kind of smart city. So my question is, right now, all over Norway, the public actors are trying to figure out how to use the technology in the best way and how to proceed. So what are your reflections on what kind of role the public actors could take?
Who wants to go first? Lars?
Well, you just have to use all the technology that you can afford and try out every possible use value for it, except that you won't do that on your own, of course. There will be a million of kommuner here and there or all across the world who will be doing something similar, and then there will be this learning process where in the end there will be cities that are smarter than they are now. It's a very boring answer, but sort of it will just happen. Now, I'm now speaking as a determinist, and that's how it will be then. You will have a communication with a company that will offer you certain services that will then have some kind of AI functionality in them, and they will say that this has been explored in another city, and so it will grow, and Bergen Kommune is just one tiny little piece of the technology that is being developed here. And of course you are involved in developing it, by all means, but still. Yes.
Anyone else?
Again,
Yeah.
so for me, the important thing is to think about means and ends. Technology is always the means, not the end. So it's always, for me, it's always important to keep your eye on the ends and bring technology in only when it serves your ends. There's a nice sort of piece about how the Amish, I don't know if you guys, how the Amish use technology. And they're much more intentional, also smaller units, but more intentional about, you know, they sort of know who they are and what they value, and they bring technology. They do, I mean, the impression is they don't use technology, but it's not true. They actually do use technology when it serves their ends, and they use it in a way that serves their ends. It's a very, it's a great model. I think it gets flipped, right? We think of technology as the end, and not, you know, we have to get the next one. We have to, without asking for what, why do we need this?
Okay, I have one more question. In the US, I just want to see if there's a difference here in universities and academics. In the US, universities seem to drive technology directly, like Google, like Facebook, comes straight out of Harvard and Stanford. And this is a cooperation with the universities, the technology companies, and
Yes.
and the capital, venture capital. Maybe start with Lars. Is there a need for a bigger distance between universities and technology in these days? Is that taken enough care of?
Oh, that was an unexpected.
Or is it a difference between Norway and the US? Are there a bigger critical distance between universities and technology in Norway than there are in the US? And I'm going to go all the way.
That's fun.
Okay.
The answer is yes. There is a bigger distance. It has to be shrunk. So the research, she has left, but the research council has to spend even more money on Norwegian technology development. Now it may sound like I'm voting for the Center Party, which I actually am, and it means that we should actually prioritize development of technologies that already exist in the USA or in China, because we simply should be able to do things with these advanced technologies according to our own will, as, let's say, governing our own interests in a fjord-plagued country with lots of valleys and little arable land and so on. We should most definitely cultivate technological development that suits us. And we are not good at this compared.
So the difference is too big between the university and commercial technology. Okay?
Yeah, if you ask, yes.
What about in the US?
So, honestly, in the U.S., there was a point in time, 30 years ago maybe, in which the government just decided not to support universities, or at least not very much. And so universities are now like businesses. And the reason they do technological development is because both it brings in funds from companies and research organizations, but also because they patent that, and that becomes part of the funding for the university. So I think it's not that's a case where the means got
Yep.
took over the ends. Yeah.
It's a big subject. We don't have much time left,
Yes.
but Niklas,
Right.
your
I would
comment.
just add to that I think there is actually an argument that you could make for universities to work closely with technology companies, particularly in sort of the age of big data, in the sense that, you know, it used to be the case that, you know, universities, scientists, we could collect our own data and develop, you know, some new finding or new insight or new technology. But more and more, you really kind of need the data that these technologies are collecting in order to ask the next set of questions, to come to the next set of insights. So I think there is actually a really big potential value to science and understanding, to collaborating, to developing relationships with industry, to get access to the data.
But that was a nice statement in terms of ends leading the means. That is, what you're talking about is the goals of the university would benefit from the collaboration.
Right.
I completely agree with that, but I think it has flipped in
Thank you very much, all four of you, and thank you to the audience. I think we should end it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I like that. It's very good. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks, that was
Thank
great.
you very much. Tusen takk.
Tack. Oj.